Hello, everyone. As the new year begins, we are excited to be back with another enthralling episode of the Professionals Pulse. I'm Farida Musaddi, the co founder and CEO of Al Fateh Technologies, a tech consultancy based in Dubai. Well, at Al Fateh, our work is deeply focused on digital transformation as well as smart cities initiatives, where AI plays a very pivotal role in shaping the future. In today's episode, we dive into the world of artificial intelligence. So stay tuned for an insightful discussion. Uh, as AI continues to shape industries and influence so many decision makings, ensuring fairness as well as transparency in its process, this is one of the most crucial aspects. Now, one of the key challenges in AI development is to track and reduce the biases which exist within the algorithms. Bias in AI can arise from numerous factors, which includes, biased training data, or maybe the design choices, or sometimes unintended societal influences, leading to unfair or discriminatory outcomes. Addressing these biases is vital not only for improving the accuracy as well as the effectiveness of the AI systems, but also for fostering the kind of trust and equity in the applications. So, in today's discussion, we will explore all of these strategies for identifying, tracking, and mitigating biases in these AI algorithms to create more responsible and equitable technologies. And joining me today on this lovely discussion and a very insightful discussion is Matilda D'Amelio. She is the CEO of Sophia AI. Hi, Matilda. How are you?
Hello, hi Farida. Good morning. I'm very well, thank you.
It's early morning for you, I know. So thank you so much for being there and joining us for this absolutely, I think, interesting and exciting episode.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So Matilda is the CEO and founder of Sophia. Is it Sophia or is it Sophia?
Sophia.
Okay, so Sophia, with nearly 15 years of expertise in digital transformation strategy, data strategy, artificial intelligence, as well as executive education. She has collaborated with global organizations such as Heineken, Bloomberg, and Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, offering strategic insights on AI, machine learning, and data driven decision making. She's passionate about driving innovation and she empowers businesses to thrive in the digital age by bridging the industry expertise with cutting edge technology. In partnership with Emeritus, she works alongside renowned institutions like MIT, Harvard, UC Berkeley, Columbia, Cambridge, Stanford, Imperial College, Kellogg School of Management, and the Indian School of Business, delivering executive education programs that equip the professionals with the skills to lead digital transformation. Additionally, she also serves as an advisory board member and consultant for think tanks as well as both profit and non-profit organizations worldwide. So, once again, Matilda, thank you so much for joining us on the Professionals Pulse, and it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us in this conversation.
Okay, so to begin with, I think the most common question that anybody can come up with in relation to this topic: what are the very common sources of the bias that exists in AI algorithms, and how can the organizations identify these biases during the development phase itself?
Yeah, so thank you. So when it comes to biases, I think we need to divide the source of biases into two main blocks. One is like the block which I call data, and the second one is the block which I called models. Now, within the data block, there are different points where the biases can emerge. One is
Okay,
really like historical data, how data have been collected historically. The second part
absolutely.
the second part is about, okay, when you are building your sampling for like training and your model, you're making certain decisions. So the
True.
sampling as well does contain biases.
Okay.
Um, and then and this is the one of the main part about the data. The second part is in the modeling. The modeling is more tricky because the biases in the modeling does sit in who is building the team. You also mentioned, Farida, so the diversity of the developers does have an effect because they're going to make a decision, but
Absolutely.
also how do we interpret the results. So which
Correct.
metrics are you going to pick? Are you going to prioritize them? So and then how are you going to interpret the results? So these are really the main two sources of biases that you can have really in models. And then going back to the second part of the question, how companies can identify and mitigating it. I always recommend people to be extremely practical and to use something which is called like a model card,
Okay.
which is really this document, which does not have to be over complicated, but is a document where you as a development team, you're basically tracking what are the different choices that you've made. And because you're
Okay.
tracking it, is a good way as well to monitor and then understanding, okay, where the biases can exist, especially if you have
Okay.
like a team of people which have also like subject matter expert. In
Mm-hmm.
AI is not now uncommon to have ethicists, to have policymakers as well involved in the process. So for me, the first point is to really build this model card to bring transparency.
Okay.
Then the second thing, it's having more diverse teams when it comes to training, testing, and validation. It does make
Absolutely.
a huge impact. Yeah.
Correct.
People have different experiences, people come from different background. So having diversity in experiences background is huge. And then my third point is, I know it's very uncommon recommendation, but I think it's going to be is very valuable. And my experience is that it works pretty well, is the use of synthetic data. So you have your
Okay.
data set, and then you extrapolate some information which help you to control for some critical biases. But because you need a lot of data for training your algorithm, you can use synthetic data to, emphasize this data. So you can feed this originally less biased data into an algorithm, creating synthetic data, and then feed it into the algorithm.
Okay.
So this is also a good way for organizations to mitigate these problems.
Okay. But how much percentage do you think that this bias does exist? Is it because we always talk about, this is a
Mm.
very common topic that even I have come across whenever I've attended any kind of conferences or meetings. This thing has always been spoken about, biasness. So, how
Mm.
much percentage do you think that it actually exists?
Um, Very high. And
Very
it does yeah, I would say it also depends on the dimension of biases. The bias, for example, for a long time we were discussing about gender biases. This gender
okay.
bias was very high before, I would say 80%, but because we've been talking about it for a long period of time, the bias has been reduced dramatically in the gender part. On the, I would say, more ethnic part, which is a very, very critical one, in the past it was huge. I would say the
Okay.
biases were immense there. But now, because we see so many more players which are coming from different parts of the world, this is kind of a problem that is kind of compensating by a little bit better,
Okay.
so that percentage is going down just because there is more like um there are much more players really in the market now which are emerging.
But even the cultural differences of people involved, does that also play a very important role in the bias?
It does, especially in the modeling part, not really
Okay.
in the data part, but it does play a huge effect in how you build your data, because Just because when we think about culture, for example, we're thinking about the different educational systems. And now, depending on what has been the education that you've been through, you've been exposed to certain models. You have certain way of interpreting things. And also when you go and you work in certain environment, you bring with you a number of experience, and also you are formed by the experience. So if there is less diversity in the cultural in terms of work experience, educational experience, this is hugely reflected. I have to
Okay.
admit that what I see, it does depend a little bit on the different parts of the world, but there is not enough diversity yet based on what I see into a lot of the development teams, which means that the biases are still there. This is why you need to track them, monitor, and then try to correct them.
Okay. Okay. So coming to our next question, how
Mhm.
does the bias in AI, manifest differently across sectors such as healthcare, finance, and education? And if you could, just highlight some real world examples for us to understand.
Yeah, so biases, they really permeate everything. Just to give you an example about healthcare, just because it's one of my favorite one. So in healthcare, there is like a very critical element, which is antibiotics. Antibiotics are
Correct.
very powerful, drugs, but
Yeah.
the R&D on antibiotics is basically flat. Has been flat for years
Okay.
and years and years. Yes, because they don't have a big return on investment. Now, what is
Oh,
happening is that now there is a lot of research on AI on how it can improve the development of antibiotics in order to shorten the R&D and
okay.
make it more financial valuable. Now, the problem is that at the moment, all the AI models which have been used for helping with the development of antibiotics is based on historical data. And
Okay.
historical data about antibiotics are very wide skewed. So if you look at different, for example, ethnic group, the white population is the population on which antibiotics are more effective. And the black population is the one on which the antibiotics are less effective because of the way in which
Okay.
antibiotics have been tested. Now, if you
Okay.
now use AI only with this historical data, that problem is not
It'll
going
give,
to be solved.
of course, it'll give you incorrect results.
Exactly. And everyone is using antibiotics, and we know that antibiotics are not as effective for everyone, but we're
True.
just keeping emphasizing it. Uh, this is why you need to break it. Now you have really the opportunity to say, okay, we know that there is a limitation in the data. We can go back and collect more data, but we can also use synthetic data to compensate and try to build antibiotics which are more effective for a much bigger portion of the population.
Okay.
That is one of the example. Another one which I think is also very effective, and it's I would put it under finance and banking, but
Okay.
is about access to loans. So a lot of,
Mhm.
for example, I'm in the UK, and when you want to buy a house and you want to ask for a mortgage, you have a credit score which is assigned to you.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, that credit score is fully automatized. Is all AI. Now, the one big part of the credit or how the credit score is built is based on historical data.
Correct.
And now what we see is that we already know that, for example, this is a system which discriminates, for example, women against men. So with all the same conditions, automatically women will have a worse credit score compared to men, because historically
Okay.
women in the UK, they were not be part of the mortgage. All the mortgage was under the name
Men.
of the husband, of the male of the family. So there is no track
Correct.
record.
Oh,
So
got
this is
it.
also another example, right, of how biases are really affecting. And so now a lot of banks now they realize that there was a problem, and they started to implement some sorts of corrections as well in the system.
Okay.
Let me give one more example, just in education. I really like it in education because education, especially now, we see quite a lot of AI, which is used also in the research phase, but also like if you are a master student, if you look for papers and it's helping you to find papers and all this inform and extrapolate key information. What they realize, for example, is that all these tools which are helping to filter papers, recommend papers, understand papers, they're heavily skewed towards authors which are working for Western universities.
Oh,
Right. Because this is
okay.
how the model have been built, because this is how historically the data set have been built. So there is a lot of interesting research which is happening in India, in China, in Japan, but because of how the model is built, if a scholar does not come from a Western university, it's less likely to be recommended in your research.
Okay.
And again, here is where you need to try to make corrections, because the word is much broader than that. There are much
Absolutely.
more. There are a lot of researchers which are around the world. They're doing amazing research. So it's very important to be aware and acknowledge those.
So it's right to say that even after so much of development, uh, from the examples that you gave, I can say that the bias is have plays a very huge role still across major industries. An industry like healthcare, where antibiotics, as you correctly said, they have different effects on different people. But from, I think, so many years, it's been the same things that we've been taking in without realizing that how things have changed and how this has to be incorporated in the new research which is being coming up. So I think quite relevant examples which showcase the effect of these biases. And if it's, these are like strong industries, if
Mm.
AI and the bias exists in these industries, I'm very sure that the smaller industries might be having more huge of an effect as compared to this.
That's
So
right. Mm.
so I think a lot of potential and a lot of work needs to be done towards removing all of these biases that actually exist in these algorithms.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But the good thing is that people are much more aware about it. Few years ago, no one talked about it, but we are in the right direction. But yes, there is still work to be done.
In fact, your organization, this is what I guess is one part of your training that you provide for different sectors and different organizations. You all train organizations on the use of AI, right? So is this also a part of your training module?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we do generally training on biases which are bespoken depending on the
Okay,
part of the organization. So, for example, we have been working quite a lot with HR teams, which they want to use AI for CV screening and CV selection. And
correct.
sometimes they want to use very advanced models like large language models. And what we did is that in the phase of fine tuning the model, we help them to understand how to reduce biases, but also in the training phase, we want them to give awareness about the fact that these models are not perfect. They
True.
have biases, and so let them aware in terms of where the biases can sit, and also help them to figuring out how you can mitigate it. So if you are an HR business partner, how you can spot the bias into the CV screening and how you can mitigate it, what sorts of control
Okay.
actions you need to have in place. Yeah, so what we do is that we do this very bespoke and training depending on the sector and application, because
Okay.
then it becomes relevant for the organization and for the people.
Absolutely. So, what are the ethical challenges, of deploying these AI solutions globally, especially in regions which
Mhm.
with diverse cultural or social and economic contexts?
Well, I'm thinking about the UAE, which is an extremely diverse place.
Absolutely.
Uh, so one of the things is that so one of the things that we know now is that one solution fit it all is very difficult, really, really to
True.
have. So it's about really delocalizing more, having much more local solutions. But if I'm thinking about UAE, which is very, very diverse, if you don't consider biases and you don't mitigate them, what is going to happen is that worst case scenario, you lose trust in in the customers, because people, they
Correct.
will realize that this is not really effective, it's not really accurate for me.
True.
So if
True.
you're in the B2C especially, this is very critical. because customer trust
Absolutely.
is, yeah. And then also, if you're in a more like critical environment, I'm thinking about healthcare, and I'm thinking about, for
Mhm.
example, using AI within hospitals, then it becomes very dangerous. And you can also
Correct.
move into some more like legal aspect, because let's assume that you are in a UAE hospital and you're using AI for supporting with diagnosis, but the effectiveness of your AI, it's particularly skewed and it does not work well, I don't know, for people with Latin or Hispanic origins. I'm just assuming now. And then you, as a doctor, you completely rely on that tool and you give the wrong diagnosis. Now, where the legal responsibility sits? Is it you in the doctor? Is it in the provider of the AI? So that is where it becomes really, really tricky.
Correct.
That's why you really need to think, in contexts which are extremely multicultural, the training phase, but also the piloting case, it has to be very, very well thought. And maybe what is happening is that you need to go step by step and say, okay, let's implement it. And we know that this is the range of application. And then we
True.
can improve it over time. And so you can increase the range of application. But yes, so just to summarize, the best case scenario, you're losing customer trust. The worst case scenario, you can go into some sorts of legal responsibilities as well.
Correct. I think the best way in such cases, in terms of implementation, I can see is to create a phase wise implementation where
Yeah.
maybe initially the dependency on the AI model could be around 10 to 20%, and more of the natural process, and then slowly increasing the responsibility or
Yeah.
the dependency on the AI model once it is getting trained with different types of diverse data or different types of diverse applications.
Yeah, and I think also we need to be very, very transparent with the users. I'm going back to the example of the doctors. Once you train them, you need to be very transparent on what is really at the moment the range of
Correct.
applications and what is really at the moment the portfolio of challenges and limitations, which is not something always happening. So, you need to be sure that there is quite a lot of fair training. And then I will go, maybe we will discuss later about regulation, but then is also where the regulation is going to play a huge role there, about
But
correctly training your people.
any such interesting application in AI or any other industry that you're seeing right now in UAE, which is being implemented for diverse backgrounds or diverse cultures?
I think, I mean, the UAE is very strong in the fintech area. I see quite a lot going on. And this is one of the area where luckily there have been a lot of data as well in the fintech, which have been recorded for many years. This is one of the area where I see more diversity from so many different point of view. So that is one area where I see less biases at the moment. I would
Okay.
say maybe the second one is AI, which is used as well for retail, for
Okay.
real estate. This is also one area where there's been quite a lot of focuses on biases, and also because the portfolio of data is very broad, this is also where I see quite a lot of improvements which have been done. So real
Okay.
estate and fintech, yeah.
Absolutely great. Um, Considering that biased data, often feeds biased algorithms, as we were
Mhm.
talking about. Um, so, of course, we mentioned that the data pool has to be diverse, but how does one ensure that in
The
terms of
diversity
these?
of the data.
Yes, yes.
So there is going to be some intrinsic limitation, which is in historically how data being collected. So if because in AI, it's also important to look at how much historical you can go back with your data, and this is an intrinsic motivation which you cannot solve. um, but when it comes to building your data set, your sample, which is going to be for your model, then I think what is very important is before you actually build the model, before you actually go into the building and you're defining the sampling, kind of doing a mapping, analyzing your data and try to understand how they differentiate what is the distribution of your data depending on a number of factors, which can be, I don't know, gender, which can be age, which can be demographic, which can be um, ethnic groups, or can be, I don't know, if you are in the medical field, it can be, different sorts of medical features. If you're in educational field, then you go into more the specificity. But what I think is very important is that we need to spend a little bit more time in the sample building, because
Okay.
sometimes what is happening is that we rush. We say, okay, this is our data, let's rush into the modeling, let's do a little bit of data cleaning, and then let's go, without truly understanding your sample and try to build better. But I think spending more time there is absolutely essential, and mapping, and then try to see where the limitation sits, and when possible add more data to try to compensate for this limitation.
Okay. So, see, what I see is there are two parts of it. One is during the development phase, as you said, creating the correct kind of model, taking into account different age groups, different genders, different cultures, etc. Now, once suppose the model is prepared, and afterwards, when the model is live,
Mm.
how much do you see is the effect of the data getting trained while it's in use? Because we call them as
Yeah.
learning models. So how much percentage does that affect the to reduce the biasness in terms of the data once people start using it?
So it does depends on the models, but it also does depends on the application. So some model by sometimes for very critical application, you cannot have data which are fed in real time, into the model in terms of adapting, especially if you have like reinforcement learning or much more advanced models. So you cannot have like real data which are fed in real time. You need to have some sort of data governance in place, which is kind of doing
Okay,
some checks before the data is fed into the algorithm. But for other applications where you can have like machines which are learning by doing, again, I will go back to the
absolutely,
example of
absolutely.
reinforcement learning. It can go in two different directions. It can go into different direction, and this is particularly critical at the beginning, because what is happening is that at the beginning, um, uh, you need to be if the people that are using it, or if the adoption is very skewed, the bias is going to be emphasized. If the adoption
Okay,
is not skewed, then the bias is going to be reduced. So what you need to do is that in the first phases you need to monitor what's going on. You cannot just put like an algorithm live and then sit back. You need to watch out what's going on. Now, the first phase, it can vary. It can be the first 3 months. It can be the first 6 months. It does depends. But
okay,
you need to watch out, because yes, your model can go in one direction or in the other. For example, in the financial sector, thinking about, I don't know if you wanted to use it for transactions, or if you wanted to use for mortgage or for loans. Generally, the supervision period is 3 months. So you need to look at what's going on, because you need to monitor, for example, in these first 3 months, how many people they're asking for a loan, and what are the characteristics of those people. Uh,
okay.
so that is a little bit what is recommended to do. And then after 3 to 6 months, then most likely there is going to be by nature a bigger pool. And so generally speaking, the biases tend to be reduced at that
Okay,
point. Mm-mm-mm.
okay, okay. I get. So coming to, we were discussing regulations. How
Mm,
can governments and policymakers, strike a balance between regulating the AI to
mm.
reduce biases and fostering innovation for solving these global challenges as well?
So first of all, I have to say that I'm European, so I have a bias towards regulation. So I think this is also important to keep in mind. But so one of the things is that it's very important, I think. So first of all, in terms of regulation, it's very important to make mandatory the creation of and the creation and of documents like the model card. I'm a strong believer this model card, and it has to be for me a regulatory requirement. So if you're an organization which is pulling something into the market, you need to see as well what has been the data, how the model has been trained, what are the decisions being made. So this one should be for me a regulatory requirement, which is very important. The second part is that as part of the regulatory requirement, you need to perfectly outline what is the spectrum of limitation, right? And these
Okay,
limitations have to be clearly communicated to the end users.
true.
Um, s- this has to be regulated, because if you don't do it and you leave to the private businesses, they will always try to sugarcoat, or they will always try to put
Yeah.
only what is really the
Maintaining the
bare minimum.
transparency. Correct. Yes, you need to.
Exactly. So you need to be very transparent in that aspect. And then last but not least, and I would put it more on the role of government, is that so you need to have some sort of, especially for critical applications, you need to have some safety nets in place before a solution is deployed. So you need
Okay.
to have some sort of risk matrix. For I'm thinking about healthcare, just because it's healthcare or defense. These are two very critical sectors. For these two critical sectors, it's very important that before a solution is deployed into the market, there are some sorts of checks which are done by external body, to really
Okay.
assess what is the level of applicability of your solution. So you can have like a sort of risk system in place where you are basically
Mhm.
assessing, depending on the application. I'm going to check, the strength, or the transparency, or the level of biases of the model, and then I'm going to assess if the model is ready to be deployed in the public market or not. So I would say these three things are very important. So documentation, transparency in the limitation, but also for the most critical applications, some sorts of safety net in place, and so,
Okay.
intermediate check before the model is released to the market.
So globally, right now, which countries or which governments do you think are more open towards, addressing or imbibing AI in their portfolio or into their different applications?
China, I
Okay,
would say China is the first country in the world, in my opinion, and then um, US for sure, and then Saudi and UAE. These I think are three regions, and I would put also India right
correct.
So I would say these are the four big players that we really see at the moment. So China, India, US, and Saudi UAE. So GCC area together. These are really areas which are pushing a lot. A lot
Towards AI,
with
correct.
with very different approaches, very
Okay,
different approaches, because for example in China the problem of biases is different, because the population is much more homogeneous from
correct,
a cultural point of view. So for them the biases are a different
correct.
angle compared to for even India, which is a very
Yeah,
diverse
they're
country.
very diverse. I was
Quite
just coming to
diverse.
that. Yes.
Yeah. So the countries that are approaching the models with a different with different angles, because it does also depends on the internal characteristics.
True, that's true, that's true. And what role can international organizations and cross border collaborations also play in addressing these AI biases and creating solutions, again, which would benefit the underrepresented communities?
This is a tricky question, because the United Nations, they've been trying to be really, really proactive. They could potentially play a key role in that, and they're really trying to play a key role, because they're really much aware about the fact of the digital divide that could be created if we don't
Okay.
assess biases. And they try to foster collaboration, and they try to put some funds, but if I'm honest, I don't see that the world is going in that direction. Despite everyone is aware about it, and the United Nations is really, really vocal about it, and they can play a very massive role. But very few, but these four players which I was mentioning, they're not really listening to this. They all are driving their own agenda, because it's a huge economical opportunity as well, and also geopolitical is very key, because it's about who is going to dominate it. So uh, but for me, if I wanted to think in a positive term, United Nations, they do play a crucial role in trying to bring together, because I'm thinking about the large language models. Ideally what we need is that we need to have large language models which are developed internationally, if we really we don't want to bring digital divide.
True.
um, and so like pushing for like these large language models which are built by teams which come from different parts of the world, which are trained in different parts of the world, which are tested in different parts of the world, it will be very, very beneficial. But
True.
as I was mentioning, I don't feel the world is going in that direction.
Absolutely. And it is difficult. I mean, to
Mm,
build such a model which would be applicable across cross border countries. First of all, I guess the regulations. because every country will have or will come up with their own set of regulations. So
Mhm.
in order to keep pace with so many regulations and so many different types of diverse backgrounds, I think that would be a real challenge. So it
Mhm.
may happen, but I don't think it can happen so easily or so soon, especially in the sectors that we were discussing: finance or healthcare. Education, yes, it might, but I think healthcare, fintech, these are,
Mhm.
according to me, I think these areas are not ones which can be implemented on such a large scale at this point of time.
That's right. I completely agree. And the proof is ChatGPT. I mean, ChatGPT is the most complex algorithm that we see in the market, and is trained on an unprecedented amount of data. The complexity of the model is unprecedented, and the initial narrative was that because of the complexity and the size of the data, this model does not have biases or has very little biases. That's not true. That's
That's not
absolutely
true.
not true. So and this is the most complex. I mean, now we have DeepSeek, which is also like a very complex model.
Yeah,
We're still discovering it, but we already know that also DeepSeek has its own biases.
correct.
So that's and these are the most advanced versions, that the most advanced model that we see at the moment. So I completely agree with you that it's going to be very challenging to have one
And
solution
again,
for
these are
all.
generalized models. So they are not focusing on one particular domain. They are generalized.
Yeah, but because of the cost, you cannot.
Yes,
If a large language models are so much costly that you cannot afford to build one large language models per application, it's just not economical affordable. So you
absolutely.
need to go in that direction of foundational model from them. But yes, so it's a little bit. So yes, it's going to be difficult to have one solution fit it all. But
Correct.
for me, the good thing is that it means that there's going to be much more plurality in the players, which we haven't necessarily seen in the past. So, the bias is also good opportunities for see much more diversity in the tech environment and in the tech
True,
solutions in the market.
true, true. So, lastly, according to you, how important is explainability in AI when you're tackling global challenges? And what steps can we take to make algorithms more transparent as well as more accountable, more trustworthy?
Well, I'm a big fan of transparency. I don't like black box model, which is unfortunately the direction in which the market is going. I think it's extremely important, and it's not only because of the bias, but it's because of other problems that can come from, related to it. And again, I'm an European one, so we love we love regulation. But so for me, there are different things. So on the large language model aspect, I'm a big fan of open source model. This is why I'm a big supporter of DeepSeek. I'm very happy about what's happening there, because we need to push for large language models, for the foundation models, not then the application, the foundations model. I'm a big fan of having them open source. So you know what data have been used for training, the code, and also the beauty, for example, of which I really like about DeepSeek is that you can, when it's producing an output, you can see also the code. So you can really see as well how the output has been produced. This I think is extremely important. It's a huge thing. So for these large language models, I think open source is a very healthy direction. And then of course you can fine tune to your own specific organizations, and this is where the private sector can help you dramatically. But the foundation it's there. In terms of other models which are not so complex, so I'm going to share what the European Union is doing, which is highly debated because maybe it's too much, but it just gives you an idea. So in European Union, what you have to do moving forward is that there's going to be like a ranking of risks. So depending on the application, a level of risk is going to be assigned. And then depending on the level of risk, you need to produce a certain documentation. Now, for low
Okay.
risk application, this documentation has to be stored only within your organization. And then if a client is asking for it, the client can access it. But for the more critical application, and think about healthcare or fintech,
Mhm.
this documentation has to be stored in a public available repository. So
Okay.
whenever you can access it, right? So it does
True.
become like a central place. And I know that it may sound a little bit too much in terms of documentation, and it is, knowing European Union, it is. But if it's make a little bit more lean and agile, I think it is a good direction to go. So really, this idea of having, making mandatory the creation of document, and depending on the level of risks, making this documentation more or less public available, so we know exactly how things are happening, how the algorithms are happening. Um,
True.
so just to give an example, so now the one, Amazon is a very strong recommendation system,
Yeah.
but we don't know how really Amazon algorithm works. And Amazon has been fined so many times because the model is not transparent at all. So we don't really know how the recommendation of, especially from the supplier side, is happening. This is not good for the health of the economy. It's not good for fair competition. So,
Correct.
having these models to be more transparent, it's very important as well for the health, not for the fairness of the competition in the market.
Got it. True,
Mm.
true. I absolutely agree. I think, as you mentioned, transparency is at most crucial, and I think that is what will hold or build the trust towards
Yeah,
that particular application or that particular model.
yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely, absolutely. Transparency is key. Is key.
Yes, yes.
Mm-mm.
So, Matilda, thank you so much for joining us today on Professionals Pulse and uh, giving these lovely live examples, practical examples, I would say, which organizations, sectors are facing right now in today's times. So I think that gave much more clarity to what the bias or the extent of the bias that exists in the algorithms and how
Mm.
much work that needs to be done towards that direction in order to remove the biases, or I can say maybe reduce these biases. So thank you so much for sharing all the insights.
Thank you, Farida, for having me and for the interesting conversation.
It's our pleasure. So, everyone, signing off. In conclusion, tracking and reducing biases in AI algorithms is not just a technical necessity, but as you heard, it's a moral imperative. By implementing robust methods for identifying as well as mitigating these biases, we can create more equitable and more trustworthy AI systems that serve all users fairly. As we continue to innovate and integrate AI in various aspects of society, it is essential to remain vigilant and proactive in addressing these challenges. The journey towards unbiased AI requires collaboration, transparency, as well as ongoing commitment to ensure that technology serves the greater good. So let us all strive to build AI systems that are not only intelligent, but they are also just. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.